The day began like any other at Maplewood Middle School. Students shuffled into their seats as the bell echoed through the hallways, signaling the start of another mundane lesson. Amara Johnson, a bright and kind-hearted 7th grader, sat quietly at her desk. Her tightly coiled braids, adorned with small, colorful beads, bounced gently as she unpacked her books. Her hair was her pride, a symbol of her culture and her identity, a masterpiece lovingly styled by her mother just the night before. In stark contrast to the bustling energy of the classroom was Ms. Grace Hardwick, a middle-aged white teacher with a reputation for her rigid discipline and unyielding demeanor. She entered the room with a sharp clap of her hands, silencing the chatter instantly. "Let's begin," she said curtly, her tone devoid of warmth. The tension began to build as the lesson unfolded. Amara, always an attentive student, raised her hand to answer a question, but Ms. Hardwick, her sharp gaze settling on Amara, ignored her. It wasn't the first time. Whispers spread among the students, many of whom had noticed the teacher's bias. Some exchanged uneasy glances, others chose to focus on their notebooks, unwilling to risk drawing attention to themselves. As the lesson continued, Ms. Hardwick began to patrol the aisles, inspecting her students' work. When she stopped at Amara's desk, the room seemed to hold its breath. "What is this?" Ms. Hardwick demanded, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. She gestured toward Amara's hair, her expression one of disdain. "How do you expect to learn with that distracting mess on your head?" Amara froze, her cheeks burning with humiliation. My mom did my hair," she stammered softly, her voice trembling. "That's no excuse," Ms. Hardwick snapped. "Stand up." The classroom was now deathly silent. Amara hesitated, her hands gripping the edges of her desk as if to anchor herself in the face of an impending storm. "Stand up," Ms. Hardwick repeated, her voice colder this time. Slowly, Amara rose to her feet. Ms. Hardwick's eyes narrowed as she reached into her desk drawer, pulling out a pair of scissors. The students gasped audibly, some shifting uncomfortably in their seats. "Since you clearly don't understand what's appropriate in a learning environment, let me help you." "No, please," Amara cried, stepping back instinctively, her voice cracked with desperation. But Ms. Hardwick grabbed her arm firmly, her grip unyielding. With ruthless precision, the scissors sliced through Amara's braids. The sound of metal cutting through hair echoed in the room, punctuated only by Amara's soft sobs. Beads scattered across the floor, rolling under desks like forgotten marbles. The students watched in stunned silence, some too shocked to react, others clutching their phones under their desks to record the horrifying scene. When Ms. Hardwick finally stepped back, she held a fistful of braids in her hand, a cruel smirk curling her lips. "There," she said, tossing the hair into the trash can. "Now maybe you'll focus on your studies instead of your vanity." The aftermath of the incident was immediate and devastating. Amara sat frozen in her seat, her hands trembling as she clutched the remains of her once beautiful hair. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't make a sound. The humiliation was too overwhelming, too raw. The bell rang, signaling the end of class. But Amara didn't move. Her classmates filed out, many throwing sympathetic glances her way, a few muttered words of comfort. But no one dared confront Ms. Hardwick. Fear loomed heavy in the air. By the time Amara returned home, her father, Chief Marcus Johnson, was already waiting in the living room. The moment he saw her, his heart broke. The confident, radiant daughter he adored now stood before him, her shoulders hunched, her eyes swollen from crying. He noticed her uneven hair, the jagged cuts, the absence of the beads she loved so much. "Amara," he said softly, kneeling to her level, "what happened?" At first, she couldn't speak, but as Marcus gently coaxed her, the story poured out in fragments, her words choked with tears. When she finished, Marcus sat back, his face a mask of fury and pain. This wasn't just an attack on his daughter, it was an attack on her identity, her pride, her very essence. "I'll handle this," he said, his voice steady but seething with barely restrained anger. "No one treats my daughter like this." The next day, Marcus arrived at Maplewood Middle School in full uniform. His badge gleamed under the harsh sunlight, a symbol of his authority and integrity. He marched into the principal's office, demanding an explanation. Principal Carter, a man known for his diplomatic but spineless nature, fumbled with his words. Chief Johnson. I'm aware of the incident. Ms. Hardwick insists it was a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? Marcus's voice thundered. She humiliated my daughter in front of an entire class. She assaulted her. Principal Carter stammered, trying to deflect responsibility. We'll conduct an internal investigation. No, Marcus interrupted. This won't be swept under the rug. I want Ms. Hardwick removed immediately. And this isn't just a school matter, it's a criminal one. The video of the incident, recorded by multiple students, had already gone viral on social media. Within hours, the entire town was talking about it. News outlets picked up the story, framing it as a glaring example of systemic racism in schools. The community was divided. Some condemned Ms. Hardwick's actions unequivocally, while others tried to defend her, claiming the video didn't tell the whole story. Protests erupted outside the school. Signs reading, "Justice for Amara," and "End Racism in Schools," filled the streets. Students and parents shared their own stories of discrimination, turning the incident into a catalyst for a larger movement. Meanwhile, Ms. Hardwick, now under intense scrutiny, maintained her innocence. It wasn't about race, she told reporters, her voice trembling with practiced remorse. I was simply trying to enforce discipline. But her words rang hollow against the mountain of evidence piling up against her. Former students began coming forward, sharing their experiences of her prejudiced behavior. The walls were closing in, and Marcus was determined to ensure justice for his daughter. The stage was set for a battle that would expose not just the truth about Ms. Hardwick, but the deep-rooted biases and systemic failures of the education system. The morning at Maplewood Middle School began with the usual hum of chatter, laughter, and clattering lockers. Amara Johnson walked confidently through the crowded hallways, her braided hair shimmering under the fluorescent lights. Each bead carried a story, a memory tied to her family, her heritage, and her identity. She had spent hours with her mother the night before, weaving the intricate braids and choosing the colors. It was more than just a hairstyle, it was a celebration of who she was. As she entered her classroom, she was greeted with a few friendly smiles and nods from classmates. Amara wasn't the most popular student, but her warmth and intelligence had earned her quiet respect among her peers. She took her usual seat in the middle row, unpacking her books with the practiced ease of a diligent student. Ms. Grace Hardwick, the teacher, entered moments later, her heels clicking sharply against the tiled floor. Her presence was always imposing, her icy demeanor silencing even the most unruly students. Today, however, there was something different, a palpable edge in her movements, a stiffness in her gaze. The lesson began, but it quickly became clear that Ms. Hardwick's attention was laser-focused on Amara. As the class worked through math problems, Amara's hand shot up to answer a question. "Amara," Ms. Hardwick said, her voice cutting through the room like a whip, "do you think your appearance is appropriate for a classroom?" The question landed like a bomb. The classroom fell silent, eyes darting between the teacher and Amara. Amara blinked in confusion, her hand lowering slowly. "I'm sorry, Ms. Hardwick," she said, her voice uncertain. "That hair," Ms. Hardwick continued, gesturing with a dismissive wave. "It's distracting. Those beads clicking around while I'm trying to teach. It's unprofessional." Amara's cheeks flushed red, a mix of confusion and humiliation swirling within her. "My mom braided it for me last night," she replied softly, her fingers instinctively reaching up to touch her hair. Ms. Hardwick's lips thinned into a grim line. "If your mother thought this was appropriate, then she's just as mistaken as you are. Stand up, Ms. Hardwick." "I didn't," Amara began, but the teacher's sharp glare silenced her. "Now," Ms. Hardwick snapped. Amara rose slowly, her legs trembling beneath her. She could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on her, the whispers of her classmates piercing her like needles. Ms. Hardwick walked over to her desk, her movements deliberate and unyielding. She pulled open a drawer and retrieved a pair of scissors. The sight of the gleaming blades sent a ripple of shock through the room. "What are you doing?" Amara asked, her voice trembling. "I'm fixing this distraction," Ms. Hardwick replied coldly. "No." Amara's protest was desperate, her voice breaking. She tried to step back, but Ms. Hardwick's hand clamped around her arm like a vice. The sound of scissors slicing through her braids was sickeningly loud in the silence of the classroom. Gasps erupted from the students as strands of Amara's hair fell to the floor, beads scattering in every direction. Amara stood frozen, her tears falling freely, her sobs caught in her throat. When Ms. Hardwick finally stepped back, she held up the severed braids like a trophy. "There," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Now maybe you can focus." Amara collapsed into her seat, her hands shaking as she reached for her hair. The once beautiful braids were now uneven stubs, a cruel mockery of what they had been. The class sat in stunned silence. A few students discreetly filmed the incident on their phones, their faces pale with disbelief. Others looked away, unable to meet Amara's tear-streaked face. When the bell rang, signaling the end of class, Amara remained in her seat, her body rigid with shock. Her classmates filed out, murmuring among themselves. Some muttered words of sympathy, while others avoided her entirely, afraid of becoming the next target. Amara eventually gathered her things and walked home in a daze. Her usual lively stride was replaced with a slow, defeated shuffle. Her hands gripped the straps of her backpack tightly, as if clinging to the only thing keeping her grounded. By the time she reached home, her father, Chief Marcus Johnson, was already in the living room, sipping his morning coffee. He looked up when he heard the door open, his face lighting up at the sight of his daughter until he noticed her expression. "Amara?" he said, standing quickly. "What's wrong?" The moment their eyes met, Amara broke down. She dropped her bag and ran into her father's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. Marcus held her tightly, his heart pounding as he stroked her back. "It's okay, baby. Tell me what happened." Amara pulled back slightly, wiping her tears. Her voice trembled as she recounted the events of the day, each word weighed down with pain and humiliation. When she finished, Marcus was silent for a long moment, his jaw clenched, his eyes dark with fury. "She did what?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Amara nodded, fresh tears streaming down her cheeks. "She said my hair was a distraction. She cut it off. Daddy, she threw it in the trash." Marcus stood, his fists curling at his sides. He had spent his entire career fighting for justice, but nothing had ever hit as deeply as this. This wasn't just an attack on his daughter, it was an attack on her dignity, her culture, her identity. "Stay here," he said firmly, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. "I'm going to fix this." The next morning, Marcus walked into Maplewood Middle School, his badge gleaming under the morning sun. His expression was calm but unreadable, a quiet intensity radiating from him. As he entered the principal's office, the receptionist stammered, Chief Johnson, do you have an appointment?" "I don't need one," Marcus replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. He pushed open the door to Principal Carter's office without waiting for permission. Principal Carter looked up, startled. "Chief Johnson." Marcus raised a hand, silencing him. "Save it," he said. "I'm here to talk about what your teacher did to my daughter." The principal paled, his hands fumbling with a stack of papers. We're handling it internally. There's no need to escalate. Internal handling won't cut it," Marcus said sharply. "Your teacher assaulted my daughter. That's a criminal offense." Principal Carter opened his mouth to protest, but Marcus continued. "I have video evidence from multiple students. The entire town is talking about this. If you think this is going to quietly go away, you're mistaken." Outside the school, a crowd had already begun to gather. Protesters held signs reading, "Justice for Amara," and "Stop Racism in Schools." Students, parents, and community leaders spoke out, sharing their own experiences of discrimination and demanding accountability. As news of the incident spread, Ms. Hardwick became the center of a media firestorm. Her attempts to defend herself only fueled the outrage. "I was enforcing discipline," she claimed in an interview. "This has nothing to do with race." But her excuses fell flat. Former students came forward, recounting similar stories of her harsh treatment toward minority students. The evidence was undeniable, and Marcus was determined to see justice served. The tension in Maplewood Middle School didn't dissipate in the days following the incident, it only deepened. Protesters gathered daily outside the gates, demanding accountability for what had happened to Amara. Inside the school, the administration scrambled to maintain order, but the damage was done. The video of Ms. Hardwick's actions had gone viral, igniting a firestorm of outrage both locally and nationally. Chief Marcus Johnson, with decades of law enforcement experience under his belt, knew how to handle investigations. But this time, it was personal. Each night after finishing his work at the precinct, He devoted hours to combing through evidence, speaking with witnesses, and building a case against Ms. Hardwick and the school administration. The video recordings became a cornerstone of his efforts. Each clip revealed Ms. Hardwick's cold, calculated demeanor as she humiliated Amara. But Marcus wasn't satisfied with just one instance. He wanted to expose a pattern. He began reaching out to former students who might have had similar experiences with Ms. Hardwick. What he uncovered was both horrifying and deeply validating. A former student, Layla Washington, recounted how Ms. Hardwick had berated her for speaking in a loud, unrefined voice during class, suggesting she act more like her white peers. Another student, Raul Martinez, revealed how Ms. Hardwick had marked his assignments unfairly, accusing him of cheating simply because his English wasn't perfect. Each story added another layer to the growing mountain of evidence. Marcus documented every detail meticulously, knowing that the case would be fought not just in the court of law but in the court of public opinion. Marcus's investigation also revealed that the school administration was far from innocent. Complaints about Ms. Hardwick's behavior had been filed over the years but were quietly dismissed or buried under bureaucratic excuses. Principal Carter, whose leadership was already being questioned by the community, had a long history of prioritizing the school's reputation over the well-being of its students. One particularly damning piece of evidence came to light: an email from a concerned parent 2 years earlier, warning the school about Ms. Hardwick's discriminatory tendencies. The email had been ignored. Marcus, furious but determined, knew this would strengthen his case. He confronted Principal Carter in his office. "You had the chance to stop this," Marcus said, his voice steady but charged with anger. "You knew, and you did nothing. Now my daughter has to pay the price." Principal Carter, visibly shaken, stammered, I mean, we couldn't prove. You didn't try to prove anything." Marcus interrupted. "You turned a blind eye because it was easier. That ends now." While Marcus waged his battle in the public arena, Amara fought her own private war. The humiliation she had suffered left deep scars, and the attention from the viral video only made it worse. Everywhere she went, people seemed to recognize her. Some offered kind words of support, but others stared with pity or worse, whispered cruel judgments behind her back. "I just want to be invisible," Amara confided to her therapist one afternoon. The sessions, arranged by her father, became a sanctuary where she could express the pain she struggled to articulate elsewhere. Her therapist, Dr. Eliza Monroe, encouraged Amara to reclaim her sense of self. "Your hair is beautiful, Amara, but it's not the only thing that makes you who you are. You're brave, intelligent, and resilient. No one can take that from you." Slowly, Amara began to rebuild. She started wearing her hair natural, finding pride in its texture and strength. Her mother, Sarah, played a crucial role in this journey, helping Amara rediscover the joy of their shared cultural traditions. The ordeal tested the Johnson family in ways they had never imagined. Marcus, consumed by the investigation, was often absent from family dinners and bedtime routines. Sarah, while supportive, felt the weight of holding the family together as both a mother and a mediator. One night, during a rare moment of quiet at home, Marcus and Sarah found themselves arguing in the kitchen. "You're always chasing justice," Sarah said, her voice tinged with frustration. "But what about Amara? She needs you here." "I'm doing this for her," Marcus shot back. "For every kid who's ever been treated like she was." "I know," Sarah replied, her tone softening, "but she doesn't just need a hero. She needs her dad." The words stayed with Marcus, grounding him in the midst of his crusade. He began making more time for Amara, finding moments to remind her that she was loved and cherished beyond measure. The trial of Ms. Hardwick became a media spectacle, drawing reporters and activists from across the state. The courtroom was packed with spectators, each day bringing new revelations that alternately shocked and inspired. Marcus took the stand as both a father and an investigator. His testimony was calm and composed, yet deeply emotional. He described the impact the incident had on Amara and presented the overwhelming evidence of Ms. Hardwick's pattern of discrimination. When the defense tried to paint Ms. Hardwick as a strict but fair educator, Marcus's cross-examination dismantled their argument piece by piece. "Fairness doesn't humiliate a child," he said, his voice ringing through the courtroom. "Fairness doesn't attack their identity. This wasn't discipline, it was cruelty." Midway through the trial, an unexpected twist emerged. A whistleblower from the school's administration provided internal memos that revealed the depth of the cover-up. Principal Carter and other senior staff had knowingly suppressed complaints against Ms. Hardwick. Fearing that firing her would draw negative attention to the school, the revelation sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Principal Carter was forced to resign in disgrace, and the school district faced a lawsuit from multiple families, with the Johnsons leading the charge as the evidence mounted. Ms. Hardwick's demeanor shifted. The once defiant teacher now appeared defeated, her lawyers struggling to mount a credible defense. In the closing arguments, Marcus's attorney delivered a powerful statement. This case isn't just about one teacher. It's about the systems that enable prejudice to thrive. It's about standing up for every child who's been told they don't belong. Today, we have the chance to say, no more. The jury deliberated for just 2 hours before delivering their verdict. Guilty on multiple counts, including assault and misconduct. Ms. Hardwick was sentenced to prison. Her career and reputation in ruins. The trial's conclusion marked a turning point for Maplewood. The community, galvanized by the Johnsons' fight, began to demand broader reforms in education. The school district introduced mandatory diversity training for teachers, revamped its disciplinary policies, and established a task force to address systemic bias. For Marcus, the victory was bittersweet. Justice had been served, but the scars of the ordeal remained. Still, he knew the fight wasn't over. The trial was just one battle in a much larger war, a war he was determined to keep fighting. The morning after the incident, Marcus Johnson sat in his home office, staring at the video on his phone. He had watched it multiple times already, each replay stoking a fire of fury and resolve inside him. The video was damning. There was no mistaking the cruelty in Ms. Hardwick's actions or the blatant humiliation Amara had endured. But Marcus knew that in cases like this, outrage alone wasn't enough. He needed facts, evidence, and a plan. Marcus made his first call to a trusted journalist, Erica Daniels, a seasoned reporter who had spent years uncovering injustices in education. He explained what had happened and forwarded her the video. Marcus, Erica said after a moment of silence, "This isn't just a story, it's a reckoning. I'll make sure it gets the attention it deserves." As Marcus hung up, he leaned back in his chair, his mind already racing with the next steps. He wasn't just going to fight for Amara, he was going to expose every crack in the system that had allowed this to happen. Marcus began by reaching out to students and parents who had filed complaints against Ms. Hardwick in the past. It wasn't long before he realized the scale of the problem. Former students came forward with stories of humiliation, discrimination, and emotional abuse. Each testimony painted a clearer picture of a teacher who had wielded her authority like a weapon, targeting minority students disproportionately. One student, now in college, described how Ms. Hardwick had mocked her accent in front of the class. "She said if I couldn't speak proper English, I shouldn't bother speaking at all," the student said, her voice trembling with the memory. Another parent revealed that her son had been suspended for disrespect after challenging Ms. Hardwick's unfair grading practices. Marcus documented every account, creating a timeline that spanned years. The pattern was undeniable, and it pointed not just to Ms. Hardwick but also to the administration that had enabled her. As Marcus dug deeper, he uncovered a trail of negligence and complicity within the school's leadership. Emails between Principal Carter and district officials revealed a concerted effort to downplay complaints and protect Ms. Hardwick from scrutiny. One email in particular stood out, a message from a parent warning about Ms. Hardwick's behavior, to which Carter had replied, "We'll handle it internally." It was clear that the school prioritized its reputation over the well-being of its students. Marcus was livid, but he knew anger wouldn't win this fight. He needed to ensure the evidence was airtight. Marcus met with a civil rights lawyer, Tamika Graves, who had a reputation for taking on cases of institutional racism. Tamika reviewed the evidence and agreed to represent the Johnsons in both criminal and civil proceedings. "This isn't just a case, Marcus," Tamika said during their first meeting. "This is an opportunity to create real change. But it won't be easy. I've never been afraid of a fight," Marcus replied as the investigation gained traction. Tensions in the community began to surface. Protests outside Maplewood Middle School grew larger and louder, with parents and students demanding accountability. Local news outlets picked up the story, and soon it was national headlines. Teacher's racist act sparks outrage in small town. While many rallied around Amara and her family, others defended Ms. Hardwick. A group of parents formed a coalition called Protect Our Teachers, claiming that Ms. Hardwick's actions had been taken out of context. At a town hall meeting, tempers flared as community members debated the incident. Marcus attended, sitting quietly in the back until one parent accused Amara of playing the victim. "You think she wanted this?" Marcus said, standing and turning to face the room. His voice was calm, but his presence commanded attention. "You think my daughter volunteered to be humiliated in front of her classmates? This isn't just about Amara. It's about every child who has ever been made to feel less than. And I won't stop until they're protected." The room fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in while Marcus fought in public. Amara struggled in private. She refused to go back to school, terrified of facing her classmates and reliving the trauma. The once vivacious girl who loved reading and drawing now spent most of her days in her room, avoiding the outside world. Her therapist, Dr. Eliza Monroe, became a lifeline. In their sessions, Amara slowly began to unpack her feelings of shame and helplessness. "I just feel broken," Amara confessed during one session. "Like she took something from me, and I'll never get it back." Dr. Monroe leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Amara, what happened to you was terrible. But it doesn't define you. Your strength isn't in what someone else took away, it's in how you rise above it." Inspired by their conversations, Amara began to channel her emotions into art. She started sketching portraits of herself, reimagining her hair as a crown of flames, flowers, and stars. Her parents encouraged her, marveling at her resilience. Marcus's relentless pursuit of justice came at a cost. The long hours and emotional toll began to strain his relationship with his wife, Sarah. One night, after an especially heated argument, Marcus found himself sitting alone in the living room, staring at a family photo on the mantel. He thought about all the moments he had missed with Amara because of his work, the bedtime stories, the school plays, the lazy Sunday afternoons. He had always justified it by telling himself he was building a safer world for her. But now he realized that she needed him to be present, not just as a protector but as a father. The next morning, Marcus surprised Amara with breakfast in bed. "Pancakes for my princess," he said, smiling as he set the tray down. Amara's eyes lit up for the first time in weeks. "Thanks, Dad," she said softly. It was a small gesture, but it marked a turning point for both of them. The courtroom was packed on the first day of Ms. Hardwick's trial. The prosecution, led by Tamika Graves, wasted no time laying out the case. The evidence was overwhelming: the video of the incident, testimonies from former students, and records of the administration's negligence. Ms. Hardwick's defense lawyer tried to frame her actions as a disciplinary measure gone wrong, arguing that she had no malicious intent. But the jury seemed unconvinced, their expressions grim as they listened to the accounts of her past behavior. One of the most emotional moments of the trial came when Amara took the stand. Dressed in a simple white dress, her hair now natural and adorned with a single braid, she looked both vulnerable and strong. When asked to describe how the incident had affected her, Amara's voice wavered but didn't break. "She didn't just cut my hair," she said, "she tried to cut my spirit. But I'm still here." Her words moved many in the courtroom to tears, including Marcus, who sat in the front row, his pride and love for his daughter evident after weeks of testimony. The jury delivered their verdict: guilty on all counts. Ms. Hardwick was sentenced to 5 years in prison, and the school district faced a significant financial settlement to the Johnson family and others who had suffered under her tenure. The trial's conclusion was a victory. But Marcus knew it was only the beginning. The fight against systemic racism in education was far from over, and he was more determined than ever to lead the charge. The investigation deepened, uncovering a disturbing pattern in Ms. Hardwick's past. As Marcus continued to interview former students and staff, the scope of the issue grew. Files began to emerge, quietly shared by anonymous teachers, containing reports that had never been addressed. These documents revealed incidents of unfair grading, verbal abuse, and, in one case, an unauthorized physical punishment where Ms. Hardwick had forcefully grabbed a student's arm, leaving bruises. Marcus meticulously pieced together these accounts, building a profile of Ms. Hardwick not as an isolated actor but as a symptom of a larger, toxic environment. The deeper he dug, the more he realized how complicit the administration had been in shielding her from consequences. At one point, Marcus received a tip about a former teacher, Ms. Elena Cross, who had resigned years earlier after filing a discrimination complaint against Ms. Hardwick. He reached out, meeting her in a quiet cafe downtown. "She's always been untouchable," Ms. Cross explained, her voice low and careful. "She had connections, family on the school board. Every time someone raised a concern, it disappeared. I filed a formal complaint after she mocked a student with dyslexia. But nothing happened. I couldn't stay in a place like that." Marcus thanked her and added her testimony to his growing file. The web of corruption and negligence was tightening, and he was determined to unravel it. One breakthrough came unexpectedly. A janitor at Maplewood Middle School, Mr. Carlos Vega, approached Marcus one evening during a community rally. Mr. Vega was a quiet man who had worked at the school for decades and had witnessed more than he cared to admit. "I've seen things," Mr. Vega said hesitantly. "Things they don't want people to know." "What kind of things?" Marcus pressed. Carlos sighed, pulling out a small notebook from his pocket. "I kept notes, dates, incidents, things I overheard. I didn't know who to tell. But after what happened to your daughter, I can't stay silent anymore." The notebook was a goldmine. It contained detailed accounts of Ms. Hardwick's behavior, as well as conversations among school staff about how to suppress complaints. One entry, dated 3 years earlier, described a meeting where Principal Carter explicitly instructed teachers to avoid escalating complaints to the district. "They called it keeping the peace," Carlos said bitterly, "but it was just sweeping dirt under the rug." As Marcus gathered more evidence, the pressure on Maplewood Middle School's administration increased. Principal Carter, already floundering under public scrutiny, called a last-minute press conference to address the situation. "We are deeply saddened by recent events," he began, his voice shaky. "We are committed to fostering a safe and inclusive environment for all students." Marcus watched the broadcast from his office, his jaw tightening. It was a hollow statement, devoid of accountability. Worse, it reeked of damage control rather than genuine remorse. Later that day, Marcus sent an official demand for Principal Carter's resignation to the school board, attaching a dossier of evidence implicating him in years of negligence. He made it clear that if Carter didn't step down voluntarily, he would escalate the matter publicly. Amara's struggles were far from over. While the community rallied around her, the personal cost of the incident continued to weigh heavily on her. Despite her father's reassurances, she felt like her life had been shattered into pieces she couldn't quite fit back together. One evening, as her parents discussed the case in hushed tones, Amara overheard her name. She stepped into the living room, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Why are you still fighting?" she asked, her voice trembling. "It's over. She already hurt me. What's the point?" Marcus stood and walked over to his daughter, kneeling so they were eye to eye. "The point," he said gently, "is that it's not just about you anymore. You were brave enough to stand tall when someone tried to break you. Now, we're making sure no one else has to go through what you did." Tears filled Amara's eyes. "But I'm tired, Dad. I just want this to be over." Marcus pulled her into a hug, his voice firm but loving. "I know, baby, and I promise, we'll see this through together. You're stronger than you think." The Johnson family's life became a whirlwind of media attention. News vans often parked outside their home, reporters eager for interviews, while Marcus handled the media with the calm of a seasoned professional. Sarah found the intrusion exhausting. One night, after putting Amara to bed, Sarah confronted Marcus. "I know you're doing this for Amara," she said, her voice tense, "but don't let this case consume you. She needs her father more than the world needs a hero." Marcus sighed, the weight of her words sinking in. "I'm trying to balance it, Sarah, but I can't stop now. If we don't fight this, nothing will change." Sarah softened, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Just don't forget who you're fighting for." While the majority of the community supported the Johnsons, a vocal minority began to push back. Some accused Marcus of exploiting the incident for attention, while others defended Ms. Hardwick as a misunderstood teacher. At a particularly heated school board meeting, a man stood up and shouted, "This is a witch hunt. Ms. Hardwick has dedicated her life to teaching. She doesn't deserve this." Marcus rose to respond, his voice steady but unyielding. "Dedication doesn't excuse harm. Teaching is a responsibility. And when someone abuses that trust, they need to be held accountable. This isn't a witch hunt, it's justice. His words silenced the room. Earning applause from the majority, the trial began amid intense media scrutiny. Ms. Hardwick arrived each day flanked by her attorney, her face a mask of stoic denial. The prosecution, led by the brilliant and fiery Tamika Graves, wasted no time in laying out the case. The evidence will show, Tamika said in her opening statement, that Ms. Hardwick's actions were not only harmful but part of a long-standing pattern of discriminatory behavior. This case isn't just about one incident, it's about a culture of silence and complicity. The most dramatic moments of the trial came from the witnesses. Former students shared stories of humiliation and bias, each account painting a damning picture of Ms. Hardwick's conduct. When Principal Carter took the stand, Tamika's cross-examination was relentless. She presented the leaked emails and Carlos Vega's notes, forcing Carter to admit that complaints against Ms. Hardwick had been ignored. The turning point came when Amara testified. With her parents watching from the front row, she spoke about the fear and humiliation she had felt. "I just wanted to be seen as a person," she said, her voice breaking, "but she made me feel like I was nothing." The jury deliberated for less than a day before delivering their verdict: guilty on all charges. The courtroom erupted in emotion as Marcus hugged Amara tightly, tears streaming down both their faces. Ms. Hardwick was sentenced to prison, and the school district was ordered to pay significant damages. Principal Carter resigned in disgrace, and the community began to heal. The verdict sent ripples through the town of Maplewood. For many, it was a moment of triumph, a long-awaited acknowledgement of the systemic issues that had plagued the community for years. For others, it was a bitter pill to swallow. The divide between those who supported the Johnsons and those who defended Ms. Hardwick had deepened, creating an air of tension in the once quiet town. Protesters continued to gather outside Maplewood Middle School, their chants shifting from demands for accountability to calls for systemic reform. Signs reading, "Justice for Amara is just the beginning," and "End racism in schools," became a common sight. The school board, under immense pressure, announced a series of reforms, including mandatory diversity training for staff and the creation of a student-led equity council. But the wounds ran deep. Parents of marginalized students began sharing their own stories of bias and neglect, further exposing the cracks in the school's foundation. What had started as a single incident had become a catalyst for an overdue reckoning. For Marcus Johnson, the victory in court was bittersweet. While justice had been served for Amara, he couldn't ignore the larger fight that lay ahead. The case had brought to light systemic failures that went far beyond one teacher or one school. Marcus, a man who had spent his life enforcing the law, realized that the battle against injustice required more than just a badge and a courtroom. He began attending community forums and speaking at rallies, using his platform to advocate for change. "We can't stop here," he said during the town hall meeting. "This is about more than one child, one teacher, or one school. This is about building a system that uplifts every child, no matter who they are or where they come from." His words resonated deeply, inspiring others to join the fight. Marcus's reputation as a principled and unwavering leader grew, and he soon found himself at the forefront of a local movement for education reform. Under intense scrutiny, the school district implemented sweeping changes. A new principal was appointed at Maplewood Middle School, one with a proven track record of fostering inclusivity. The administration established a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination and launched an anonymous reporting system for students and staff to address grievances. But the changes were met with resistance from some corners. A group of parents formed a counter-movement, claiming the reforms were divisive and politically motivated. They argued that the focus on diversity training unfairly labeled teachers as biased. At a heated school board meeting, Marcus confronted the opposition head-on. "This isn't about blaming anyone," he said firmly. "It's about creating a safe and supportive environment for every child. If that makes you uncomfortable, then maybe it's time to ask yourself why." His words were met with applause from the majority. Though the resistance persisted, the tension underscored the deep-rooted challenges of confronting systemic issues. But Marcus remained undeterred, reclaiming her voice. For Amara, the road to healing was slow but steady. The scars of the incident lingered, but with the support of her family and community, she began to rebuild her confidence. Art became her refuge, a way to process her emotions and reclaim her identity. Her drawings, once private, started gaining attention after she shared them at a local art exhibit. One piece in particular, titled "Crown of Strength," depicted a young black girl with a radiant crown of natural hair. Her head held high. The artwork struck a chord with viewers, many of whom saw their own struggles and triumphs reflected in it. "You've turned your pain into something powerful," her mother said, tears in her eyes, as they stood together at the exhibit. "I'm so proud of you." Amara's journey also inspired her to become more vocal. She began speaking at community events and school assemblies, sharing her story and advocating for marginalized students. Her courage and poise left a lasting impression, earning her the admiration of peers and adults alike. The incident had strained Amara's relationships with her classmates. Some had remained silent during the ordeal, too afraid to speak out. Others had actively avoided her, unsure of how to navigate the situation. But as the weeks passed, many began reaching out, offering apologies and support. One day, a group of students approached Amara in the cafeteria. "We should have stood up for you," one of them said, their voice heavy with regret. "We're sorry." Amara hesitated, the hurt still fresh, but she chose forgiveness. "It's not easy to stand up when you're scared," she said, "but it's not too late to start." Her words marked a turning point. The students pledged to support her efforts, forming a peer-led group focused on promoting equity and inclusion at the school. The Johnson story gained national attention, drawing media outlets, activists, and educators to Maplewood. Marcus was invited to speak at conferences and panel discussions, sharing the lessons learned from their experience. Amara's artwork was featured in a national campaign celebrating cultural pride and resilience. Further amplifying her voice, the family received letters from people across the country, students who had faced similar challenges, parents who had fought their own battles, and teachers who wanted to do better. Each message reaffirmed their commitment to the cause. Marcus's leadership extended beyond Maplewood. He collaborated with other community leaders to push for state-level reforms, advocating for increased funding for underserved schools, mandatory anti-bias training for educators, and stronger protections for students' rights. At one rally, he delivered a powerful speech. "Change doesn't come from comfort. It comes from courage. We owe it to our children to create a world where they can thrive without fear of being diminished for who they are." His efforts began to bear fruit. State legislators introduced a bill named after Amara, aimed at addressing systemic inequities in education. The proposed legislation became a rallying point for activists. Drawing widespread support, the story culminated in a powerful moment when Amara was invited to deliver a keynote address at a national youth summit. Standing on a stage before thousands of young people, she spoke from the heart. "They tried to take my voice, my pride, my identity, but I refused to let them. And now I stand here, not just for myself, but for every kid who's ever been told they don't belong. We all have a voice, and it's time we use it." Her words were met with a standing ovation, solidifying her role as a symbol of resilience and hope by the end of their journey. The Johnson family had become a beacon of change in Maplewood and beyond. While the scars of the past remained, they had turned their pain into purpose, inspiring a movement that would continue to grow. Amara, now a confident and determined young woman, looked toward the future with hope. "This isn't the end," she told her father one evening as they sat together on the porch. "It's just the beginning." Marcus smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "And whatever comes next," he said, "we'll face it together." The morning after the verdict, Marcus Johnson woke up early, the victory from the trial still fresh in his mind. Yet, as he sipped his coffee, he couldn't shake the feeling that the battle was far from over. While Ms. Hardwick had been held accountable, the systemic issues that allowed her behavior to persist remained deeply rooted. When Marcus checked his inbox, he found dozens of messages, some congratulatory, others filled with new accounts of discrimination from parents and students across the district. One email caught his attention. It was from a teacher at a nearby school, Ms. Kendra Liu, who claimed she had been silenced after reporting a colleague for racist comments. "I don't know who else to turn to," she wrote. "After seeing what you've done for your daughter, I thought you might be able to help." Marcus knew that his fight wasn't just about Amara anymore. It was about ensuring that no one else would have to endure what she had. The victory in court also unleashed a torrent of backlash. A vocal minority, emboldened by online forums and social media, began to paint Marcus and his family as troublemakers. Rumors spread that Marcus was using his position as police chief to settle personal scores. And anonymous threats started appearing in his mailbox. One night, as Marcus walked to his car, he noticed a spray-painted message on the side of his house: "Traitor." His fists clenched as he scanned the empty street, anger boiling inside him. Sarah found him scrubbing the graffiti off the next morning. "This is what they do when they feel threatened," she said, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You're making them uncomfortable because they know change is coming." Marcus nodded but felt the weight of the risk he was taking, not just for himself, but for his family. At Maplewood Middle School, the newly appointed principal, Dr. LaToya Bennett, wasted no time in making her presence felt. A respected educator with a history of championing equity, Dr. Bennett held a town hall to address the community's concerns. "I understand that trust has been broken," she said to the packed auditorium, "but I promise you this: Maplewood Middle School will become a place where every child feels safe, valued, and empowered." The meeting was not without its challenges. Some parents voiced concerns about the changes, accusing Dr. Bennett of prioritizing diversity over discipline. But Dr. Bennett handled the criticism with grace, her resolve unshaken. "We are here to educate and uplift, not to tear down," she said. "If that makes anyone uncomfortable, I suggest you reflect on why." Her words earned a standing ovation from most of the audience, signaling a new chapter for the school. Amara's journey to healing took a transformative turn when she received an invitation to speak at a statewide student leadership conference. Initially hesitant, she confided in her father. "What if they don't want to hear what I have to say?" she asked. Marcus knelt beside her, his voice steady. "You've already changed so much just by standing tall. Imagine what you can do if you use your voice." At the conference, Amara shared her story. She spoke of the pain and humiliation she had endured but also of the strength she found in reclaiming her identity. Her words left the audience in awe, and by the time she finished, the room erupted into applause. After her speech, students lined up to thank her, sharing their own experiences of adversity. One young girl, tears streaming down her face, said, "You've made me feel like I'm not alone." Back at school, Amara noticed a shift among her peers. Students who had once been silent or distant began reaching out. One day, her former classmate Megan, who had filmed the incident but hadn't spoken up during the trial, approached her nervously. "I should have done more," Megan admitted. "I was scared, but that's not an excuse." "I'm sorry." Amara paused, the memory of Megan's silence still fresh in her mind. But then she smiled. "It's not too late to do the right thing now." Megan took her words to heart, becoming one of the most vocal members of the new student-led Equity Council. Together, they organized workshops and events to promote understanding and inclusion, transforming the school culture from within as Marcus continued his advocacy work. An investigative journalist uncovered a startling piece of information. Ms. Hardwick's actions had been flagged during her hiring process, but her connections within the school board had overridden the concerns. This revelation sent shockwaves through the community, further eroding trust in the school district's leadership. The journalist published a scathing exposé, naming board members who had suppressed complaints to protect their own reputations. One member, who had publicly supported Ms. Hardwick during the trial, resigned in disgrace. This development reignited protests, with demands for a full audit of the district's hiring practices. Marcus, now a central figure in the movement, led a march to the district office, chanting, "No more silence, no more cover-ups." The momentum from the case led to the drafting of a landmark education reform bill. Nicknamed Amara's Law, the bill proposed mandatory anti-bias training for teachers, increased funding for diverse curricula, and stronger protections for students reporting discrimination. At a legislative hearing, Marcus delivered an impassioned speech. "This isn't about politics," he said. "It's about humanity. Every child deserves to walk into a classroom knowing they're safe, respected, and valued." The bill passed with overwhelming support, marking a historic victory for education equity in the state. The culmination of Amara's journey came when she was invited to deliver a speech at a national conference on youth empowerment. Standing on stage before thousands, she reflected on her experience. "They tried to take my voice," she said, her words resonating with quiet strength. But I've learned that even in silence, there is power waiting to be unleashed. We all have the ability to create change, not by being perfect, but by being brave. Her speech was met with a standing ovation, solidifying her place as a symbol of resilience and hope as the dust settled. The Johnson family began to find peace. Amara thrived, using her platform to continue advocating for change. Marcus, now a respected leader in the fight for systemic reform, found a renewed sense of purpose. One evening, as the family sat together on their porch, Amara looked out at the horizon. "Do you think things will ever really change?" she asked. Marcus smiled, placing a hand on her shoulder. "They already have, and they'll keep changing, as long as people like you keep fighting." The stars above seemed to shine a little brighter that night, a testament to the power of courage, resilience, and the unwavering pursuit of justice. The momentum sparked by the Johnson family's fight began spreading across the state and beyond. Schools in neighboring districts faced increased scrutiny, with parents and students stepping forward to report incidents of bias and mistreatment that had long been ignored. Marcus's inbox was flooded with messages from people across the country, each letter a testament to the systemic nature of the issues they had confronted. One day, Marcus received a letter from a principal in a small rural town. She described how Amara's story had inspired her teachers to rethink their approach to discipline and cultural sensitivity. "Because of your courage," she wrote, "we are changing the way we treat our students. You've sparked something bigger than you know." Amara's artwork also began to gain national recognition. A nonprofit organization focused on empowering youth commissioned her to create a mural for their new headquarters. The mural, titled "Rising Together," depicted a diverse group of children holding hands, their faces illuminated by a radiant sun. It became a symbol of hope and unity, a visual reminder of what could be achieved through collective action as the movement grew. Marcus and Amara were invited to meet with the state governor to discuss education reform. The governor, a pragmatic but compassionate leader, had closely followed the case and the subsequent public outcry. "You've shown us that change is not just possible, it's necessary," the governor said during their meeting. "We want to ensure that what happened to Amara never happens to another child." The result of the meeting was a comprehensive education reform package that included funding for underprivileged schools, mandatory cultural competency training for teachers, and stricter oversight of school boards. Dubbed the Amara Initiative, the legislation was celebrated as a groundbreaking step toward equity in education. At the signing ceremony, Amara stood beside the governor, her father, and a group of students from across the state. "This isn't just my victory," she said in her speech. "It's ours, and it's proof that when we stand together, we can change the world." Amid the public support, a surprising voice emerged, one of Ms. Hardwick's former colleagues. Mr. Jonathan Fields, a retired teacher, wrote an op-ed in a major newspaper titled, "I Should Have Spoken Up." In it, he detailed how he had witnessed Ms. Hardwick's behavior for years but had remained silent out of fear of professional repercussions. "I failed my students by not using my voice when it mattered most," he wrote, "but Amara's courage has reminded me that it's never too late to do the right thing. We all have a responsibility to stand against injustice, no matter the cost." The piece went viral, sparking a broader conversation about the role of bystanders in perpetuating systemic issues. Educators across the country began reassessing their own practices, vowing to be active allies for marginalized students months after the trial. The Johnson family received an unexpected letter from Ms. Hardwick herself. The letter, written from prison, was filled with remorse and introspection. "I've spent a lot of time reflecting on my actions," she wrote. "I now see the harm I caused, not just to Amara but to every student who walked into my classroom and felt unseen or unvalued. I am deeply sorry. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed to let you know that I am working to become a better person." The letter sparked a range of emotions in the Johnson household. Marcus was skeptical, but Amara, showing a maturity beyond her years, chose to focus on the possibility of growth. "She's trying, Dad," Amara said one evening as they sat on the porch. "Maybe it's not too late for her to change." Years later, Amara stood on the stage of her high school graduation, her cap adorned with the words, "Still I Rise." She had grown into a confident, articulate young woman, her presence commanding attention as she delivered the valedictorian speech. "4 years ago, I stood at a crossroads," she said. her voice steady and clear. I could have let anger and fear define me. Instead, I chose to turn my pain into purpose. And today, I stand here not just as a survivor, but as a testament to the power of resilience, community, and hope. Her words were met with thunderous applause, her family cheering the loudest from the front row as Amara prepared to leave for college. The Johnson family reflected on how far they had come. Marcus, now a respected leader in education advocacy, had founded an organization dedicated to combating systemic racism in schools. Sarah, ever the anchor of the family, had become a mentor to parents navigating their own struggles within the education system. Before Amara left for college, Marcus handed her a small box. Inside was one of the beads from the braids that had been cut off years ago. "This is where it all began," he said, "and look how far you've come." Amara smiled, tears welling in her eyes. "Thank you, Dad, for everything." The story ends with Amara walking onto her college campus, her head held high and her heart full of determination. She carried with her not just the lessons of her past, but the unshakable belief that she could create a better future. As she entered her dorm room, she hung up a small framed picture of her family on the wall. Beneath it, she placed a handwritten quote: "Change begins with courage. And courage begins with us." And with that, the Johnson family's journey came full circle, a story of pain turned into purpose. And a reminder that even in the face of adversity, the human spirit can rise, inspire, and transform.